On a quiet morning in 1995, in a small suburban neighborhood in Clarion, Pennsylvania, a 7-year-old girl named Chloe Holloway vanished without a trace. Police found no evidence. The entire community was left terrified and confused. More than 25 years later, her mother finally decided to pack up the old family home and found an unopened birthday gift, still sitting exactly where she'd left it. What was hidden inside that box exposed a secret that changed everything. Clarion was the kind of town where nobody locked their front door. Thick oak forests, rolling hills, quiet streets lined with old 2-story houses. Kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, neighbors talked on porches about high school football and the weekend church supper. Crime was something that happened on the evening news, somewhere else. Not on Birch Street. Maggie Holloway loved her quiet life there. 32 years old that autumn, working part-time at the local library, her days built around her family. Her husband Arthur worked long hours and extra night shifts whenever he could at the paper mill, saving toward a real family vacation. Their house was always full of noise and the smell of home cooking. They had 2 children. Toby, 10, quiet and protective, always buried in comic books or building wooden models in his room. And Chloe, just 2 days from turning 7, bright and cheerful, curly brown hair, big green eyes, a laugh that filled a room. She collected fallen leaves in her coat pockets on the walk home from kindergarten, and every surface in the kitchen was covered in her drawings: yellow suns, purple flowers, stick figure portraits of the whole family in front of their yellow house. That October, the whole house was buzzing for Chloe's birthday, set for Saturday the 14th. She'd been crossing off the days on a hand-drawn calendar taped to the fridge, red crayon marks piling up, asking daily about strawberry cake with pink frosting and whether her friend's pet rabbit could come to the party. The Monday before, Maggie drove out to find the exact gift Chloe had been begging for: a hand-painted wooden music box with a tiny ballerina that spun to a soft lullaby whenever the lid opened. It took 3 towns before she found it. Back home, she wrapped it carefully in bright pink paper with a silver ribbon and bow, tucked a handwritten card under the ribbon, and hid it on the top shelf of her closet, behind a stack of winter blankets, safely out of curious reach. Thursday, October 12th, started like any other fall morning: crisp air, the smell of wood smoke, and wet leaves. Arthur left before dawn for his shift. Toby ate cereal at the table while Maggie combed Chloe's curls and tied a pink wool headband in her hair. At 8:30, Maggie walked both kids to the end of the driveway, kissed Chloe on the cheek, and watched her skip off toward the elementary school 3 blocks away. At noon, Maggie walked down to collect her from her half-day kindergarten session. They walked home together, Chloe chattering about a story her teacher had read and reminding her mother again that her birthday was only 48 hours away. They had grilled cheese and apple cider at the kitchen table, and Chloe drew a napkin picture of herself in a party hat next to a giant pink cake. Toby got home from school at 3:15, grabbed an apple and his homework, and went upstairs. By 3:30, the sun was still warm, and Chloe asked to play in the backyard, fully fenced, a safe space she'd played in hundreds of times, backing up to a line of trees that separated the neighborhood from a small public park. Maggie told her she had half an hour before dinner to stay inside the fence and keep the gate shut. Chloe promised, grabbing her little plastic rake to build a pile of leaves. Through the kitchen window, Maggie watched her daughter singing softly to herself, raking red and gold leaves into a pile near the swing set. It felt like a perfectly ordinary afternoon. It didn't feel like a day anything terrible could happen. It just didn't. At 3:45, the hallway phone rang. Maggie dried her hands and answered Arthur, calling to say he'd be working 2 hours of overtime that evening. They talked for under 4 minutes, went over dinner plans, confirmed the birthday party for Saturday. Ordinary, mundane. When Maggie hung up at 3:49 and walked back to the kitchen window, the yard was quiet. The leaf pile sat undisturbed. The little pink rake lay flat on the grass by the swing set. Chloe wasn't there. At first, Maggie wasn't worried maybe Chloe had wandered behind the garage or the shed, hunting for more leaves. She stepped out onto the porch, calling her daughter's name into the cool afternoon air. No answer, just whined through the oaks. She checked behind the garage, inside the shed. Nothing. Then she saw at the back gate, always kept latched, hanging half open, swinging gently, creaking. A wave of cold dread hit her chest. She ran to the gate and looked out toward the tree line. The dirt trail into the woods was empty. Leaves blew across the path. No sign of her daughter. Panic took over completely. Maggie sprinted back into the house, screaming Chloe's name. Toby came running downstairs, terrified by the look on his mother's face. She sent him through every room in the house, every closet, under every bed, nothing. She ran to Evelyn Miller's house 2 doors down. Evelyn, who often watched the kids, came out to find Maggie barely able to speak. Together with Toby, they combed Birch Street, knocking on doors, calling Chloe's name until their throats were raw. Nobody had seen her. Nobody had heard anything unusual. At 4:15, 30 minutes after Chloe was last seen, Maggie called 911, her voice shaking so hard the dispatcher had to ask her to repeat herself twice. Within 7 minutes, cruisers were on Birch Street, lights flashing, neighbors stepping out onto their lawns in shock as officers set up a perimeter around the Holloway house. If you want more emotional cold case stories like this, please subscribe. Your support really does mean a lot to us. Detective Paul Vance, 15 years on the Clarion force, arrived just before 5 and took charge immediately, ordering a search of every yard, alley, and shed within 4 blocks. As the sun dropped and shadows lengthened, teams moved into the woods behind the house, flashlight beams sweeping the trees, calling Chloe's name into the growing dark. Around 6:30, an officer near the wooded trail found something snagged on a thorn branch 50 yards past the open gate. Chloe's pink wool headband, undamaged, sitting near a narrow dirt access road cut through the woods, occasionally used by utility trucks. Vance brought the headband back to the house in an evidence bag. Maggie broke down at the sight of it, Arthur beside her, pale and frozen. Vance sat across from her at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Holloway, think carefully. Did you notice anyone on the street today? Any unfamiliar cars? Anyone near the back fence while Chloe was outside?" Maggie started to say no, and stopped. A memory surfaced, one she'd overlooked in the chaos. 30 minutes before Chloe vanished, standing at the sink, she'd glanced toward the tree line and seen a dark blue sedan idling on the gravel access road, engine running. A silhouette behind the tinted glass watching the yard. At the time, she'd assumed it was a utility worker on break. Now it filled her with dread. Had that car taken her daughter, or was something far more personal happening? Something none of them were ready to face. Vance secured the access road within 20 minutes, yellow tape strung between the trees. Investigators found faint tire impressions in the soft dirt near the fence, but before they could cast them, rain rolled in, heavy and sudden, and washed the tracks away within the hour. By Friday morning, the search for Chloe had become one of the largest in Clarion County's history. State troopers, search dogs, a command center at the community center, and dozens of volunteers combing the countryside in the cold rain. Helicopters with thermal cameras swept the tree canopy. Teams pushed through brambles, checked barns and flooded ditches. Bloodhounds tracked Chloe's scent from her bedroom, out the back door, across the lawn, through the gate, and lost it completely right at the gravel road. It confirmed the department's worst fear: she hadn't wandered off and gotten lost. She'd been taken from the edge of her own yard, in a vehicle. Inside the house, time seemed to stop. Maggie sat with a cold, untouched cup of coffee, staring at the empty swing set, replaying those 4 minutes on the phone over and over. If only I hadn't answered. If only I'd checked that car sooner. Arthur held her hand through the day and wept alone in the basement at night. 10-year-old Toby sat on his bed for hours, tortured by the fact that he'd been 20 feet above the backyard and hadn't heard a thing. By Friday afternoon, thousands of flyers with Chloe's smiling kindergarten photo went up across the region. Police cross-referenced every registered dark blue sedan in Clarion and the surrounding counties. Over 200 vehicle owners visited, questioned, cleared. Every single lead ran into a solid alibi. As the days dragged on, Clarion changed. Doors that had stood unlocked for generations got bolted. Parents stopped letting kids play out front. Neighbors started looking sideways at each other. Saturday, October 14th, Chloe's birthday dawned gray and cold. No one mentioned the date out loud, but it hung over the house. The calendar on the fridge still showed a red mark on the 12th, the day everything stopped. Upstairs, the wrapped music box sat untouched on its shelf. Maggie couldn't bring herself to open the closet. Weeks became months with no breakthroughs. Vance stayed late at the station, working through witness statements and field reports, interviewing delivery drivers and utility workers who ran the neighborhood route. Nobody remembered anything unusual on the gravel road that afternoon. Dozens of people with records in the tri-state area were brought in and cleared. False sightings poured in from other towns, each one a dead end. Cruel hoax calls came into the house at night, forcing police to trace the family's line. Nothing ever came of them. By the time the first snow fell, the search command center had been dismantled, the news trucks gone, the flyers fading and tearing on the telephone poles. The case that had consumed the whole state was slowly going cold. If you want more emotional cold case stories like this, please subscribe. Your support really does mean a lot to us. In late November, nearly 7 weeks in, Vance went back to the beginning, pulling every file and recording collected that first day. Among them was a cassette from the answering machine belonging to Mrs. Gable, an elderly neighbor across the street who'd been out of town on the 12th. Her machine had recorded an incoming wrong number at 3:42 that afternoon, and because her window had been cracked open, the sensitive microphone had also picked up faint background sound from outside. At the time, an officer had listened, heard nothing but the wrong number, and filed the tape as routine. Vance took it to the state police audio lab in Harrisburg to have the background noise cleaned up. A week later, sitting in a soundproof room with headphones on, he heard it wind, rustling leaves, and then, unmistakably, a child's voice. Chloe's voice. Light, happy, no sign of fear or struggle, giggling, speaking to someone at the back gate. 4 words, clear as day, "You brought it back." The tape cut off as the machine disconnected. Vance sat frozen. Chloe hadn't been snatched by a stranger from the woods. She'd walked to that gate willingly, delighted, greeting someone she already knew, someone who'd brought her something she recognized. When Vance played the cleaned-up tape for Maggie and Arthur, Maggie covered her mouth, tears streaming. It changed everything. Chloe hadn't cried out, hadn't fought. She'd gone to that gate smiling, because she trusted whoever was standing there, and because they'd returned something she thought she'd lost. Vance sat with Maggie for hours, working through every toy Chloe had misplaced recently. That's when Maggie remembered about 10 days before, Chloe had lost her favorite toy, a handmade cloth doll with yellow yarn hair, and a blue dress her grandmother had sewn for her 5th birthday. Chloe had cried for 2 days over it. Maggie had searched the whole house and assumed it had been left at school or a friend's. Sitting on Chloe's bed, Vance understood. Someone had taken that doll from inside the house or yard. Days in advance kept it, waited, and used it Thursday afternoon to lure her quietly through the gate. Which meant this wasn't a stranger passing through. It was someone with access to the Holloway house. Someone who knew their routines. Someone Chloe trusted completely. Vance re-interviewed everyone who'd been inside that house in October. Close friends, family, repairmen. Evelyn Miller, questioned again, had an ironclad alibi at a doctor's appointment 3 towns over. Arthur's brother Ray had a documented shift on a job site in Ohio. The heating contractor had 4 co-workers vouching for his whereabouts all afternoon. Every lead dissolved into a dead end. No prints on the gate. No new witnesses. No sedan. Autumn turned to winter, then spring, then years. The posters yellowed and vanished. The case faded from the papers and slid into cold storage, an open file with no active investigation. The silence didn't heal the house. It settled in and stayed. Arthur spent his evenings staring at old photo albums, blaming himself for the overtime shift, for not being home to see that car. The stress wore him down for 2 decades, and in the spring of 2015, he died of a heart attack at 57. His last whispered words about his missing daughter. He never learned the truth. Toby grew into a quiet, serious man, carrying the guilt of having been upstairs that afternoon. He went to college, moved to Pittsburgh to work as an accountant, and came back to Clarion every single weekend to check on his mother, always scanning passing cars out of habit. Maggie stayed on Birch Street alone as the neighborhood changed around her new families. Kids who hadn't been born in 1995, playing on the same sidewalks. Inside her house, though, time never moved past October of that year. Chloe's room stayed exactly as she'd left it, backpacked by the door. Floral sheets, the napkin drawing still taped to the fridge, its colors faded to a soft yellow under 25 years of dust. By 2020, Maggie was 62, her hair gone silver, the big old house too much to manage alone. After months of gentle persuading, Toby convinced her to sell and move into a single-story apartment near him in Pittsburgh. Packing up 25 years of memory nearly broke her every box, felt like leaving Chloe behind all over again. Toby spent every weekend that October helping her pack, room by room, saving the master bedroom for last. On a chilly Saturday afternoon in late October, exactly 25 years after Chloe disappeared, Maggie stood alone in her stripped bedroom, only the walk-in closet left untouched. She climbed a step stool to reach the top shelf, hadn't reached in over 2 decades, fingers brushing dusty blankets, old hangers, forgotten shoeboxes until they found a hard rectangular package tucked behind a stack of quilts. The unopened birthday gift. The music box from 1995. The pink paper had faded to a dusty rose, the ribbon dull, the card still tucked under the bow. Happy 7th birthday. Sweet Chloe. Love, Mom. Maggie sat on the bare mattress, clutching it to her chest, shaking. Toby found her there and sat beside her without a word, arm around her shoulders. The two of them quiet as the wind moved the bare oaks outside. Before we continue, if this story has kept you watching this far, please subscribe. Your support really does mean a lot to us. Maggie decided she couldn't pack the gift away unopened. She needed to hear that lullaby, just once, as a quiet goodbye. Sliding a thumbnail under the old tape, she noticed something odd. The thick yellowed masking tape she remembered using in 1995 had a clean, straight cut in it, layered over with a strip of clear commercial tape. Someone had sliced the paper open after she'd hidden the gift and resealed it. Mom, Toby whispered, seeing it too. Did you retape this? No, Maggie said. I wrapped it once. Nobody was supposed to know it was even up there. With shaking hands, she tore the rest of the paper away and lifted the lid. Beside the music box sat 2 things that had never been there when she wrapped it: a small rusted iron key on a faded green tag stamped 214, and an old Polaroid, face down. She turned it over. It showed Chloe's missing yarn doll sitting on a car's passenger seat, and reflected in the rearview mirror, unmistakably clear, was the face of the driver. A face Maggie knew instantly. A face that had stood beside her through the entire tragedy. It was Harlan Reed, Arthur's closest friend since childhood, their neighbor 2 streets over, his co-worker of 20 years at the mill. An uncle figure to both kids. The man who'd fixed their back porch every summer, brought homemade cider every fall, sat at their table every Sunday. The man who'd been among the first to arrive when Chloe went missing, who organized search parties, handed out flashlights, wept beside Arthur in the driveway. He'd stood beside them the whole time. He'd held Arthur's hand at his funeral, comforting a man who died never knowing his best friend had torn his family apart. "Uncle Harlan," Toby whispered, staring at the photo. It was him. The whole time. It made no sense on the surface, a quiet, mild-mannered man with no record, treated like family for decades. Toby didn't wait. He called the Clarion Police Department and told the dispatcher they'd found physical evidence in the 1995 disappearance of Chloe Holloway. Within 30 minutes, Detective Marcus Miller, head of the cold case unit, arrived, along with a retired Detective Vance, now 78, leaning on a cane, hair entirely white. The case had haunted him for 15 years of retirement. The moment Miller called, he'd grabbed his coat. Around the same kitchen table where Vance had taken Maggie's first statement in 1995, Miller examined the Polaroid under a magnifying glass, comparing the reflected face to Harlan's 1995 driver's license photo. It matched jawline, glasses, everything. "I interviewed Harlan 3 times back in '95, Vance said quietly, hands trembling. "He was on our list, worked with Arthur, owned a blue station wagon. But his supervisor signed off on his time card for a double shift that afternoon. We trusted him. We all trusted him." Miller turned to the rusted key. Faint embossed lettering under the grime on the green tag read, "Clarion River Mini Storage." Maggie gasped. It was an old self-storage facility on the far edge of town, tucked behind pine woods along the river, less than 4 miles from the mill. "We never checked private storage lockers back then," Vance said. "Not without a specific tip. If he rented one under a false name and paid cash, we'd never have known." Miller radioed the station for the facility's rental records. They came back within the hour. Unit 214 had been continuously rented since September 1995 under the alias Henry Reed. Monthly payments, made in cash, mailed in plain envelopes, all the way through 2020. "Still current. We're getting a warrant," Miller said. "We're opening 214. By 4 that afternoon, cruisers and forensic vans surrounded the gated facility. Maggie and Toby waited in an unmarked car, while officers with bolt cutters made their way to the far corner of the lot. Vance insisted on walking down himself. Unit 214's rusted metal door was sealed with a heavy padlock, a perfect match for the key from the birthday box. Miller turned it, the mechanism grinding after 25 years of neglect, and with a screech of metal, 2 officers rolled the door open. Dust and the smell of old motor oil rolled out. Flashlight beams cut into the dark, and there, under a heavy canvas tarp, sat a car. Miller pulled the tarp back. A dark blue 1988 Ford station wagon, the exact sedan Maggie had seen idling on the gravel road 25 years earlier. Flat tires, grime-caked windows, sitting exactly where it had been driven the night Chloe disappeared. Inside, preserved like a time capsule, a faded diner cup, a Pennsylvania road map, a pair of work gloves on the passenger seat. In the trunk, a wooden tool chest with a brass latch. Inside it, Chloe's small yellow backpack, her pink plastic rake, her kindergarten drawing notebook, and beneath it, the missing yarn doll in its blue dress. Beside the doll, a leather-bound journal and 3 microcassette tapes labeled with dates from October 1995. Miller opened the journal to the first page, neat, precise handwriting. Harlan's. It described a hidden, obsessive resentment building since late September 1995, fixated on Arthur's happy family life. Flipping to October 12th, the entry described in detail how he'd stolen the yarn doll days earlier, brought it to the back gate that Thursday, and used it to coax Chloe out. It described driving her deep into the Allegheny National Forest, to an abandoned hunting cabin that had belonged to his late grandfather, a place no one else knew existed. And the final line on that page, followed by a set of coordinates, made clear what had happened to her that night. Miller closed the journal, hands shaking. "Get State Tactical on the radio. Harlan Reed is 71, alone at his house on River Road. We move now before he knows we found the locker. 15 minutes later, cruisers surrounded Harlan's modest house. Miller and Vance climbed the porch steps together. The door opened, and Harlan stood there in an old flannel shirt, gray hair unkempt until his eyes met Vance's, and something in his face went cold and still. "Harlan Reed," Miller said. "We have a warrant for this property. We've opened storage locker 214. Harlan's shoulders dropped. He didn't ask what they meant, didn't demand a lawyer. He held out his hands. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. "I knew it every time I looked at that house on Birch Street." At the station, laid out on the table, the Polaroid, the key, the journal, the tape. Harlan eventually spoke. He confessed to everything. He'd been bitterly, quietly jealous of Arthur's life for years, the happy marriage, the 2 kids, the warmth Harlan's own life never had. He decided he wanted Arthur to carry a pain that would never heal, one that could never be traced back to him. In late September 1995, during a Sunday visit, he'd slipped the yarn doll from Chloe's room into his coat pocket and waited. On October 12th, knowing Arthur was working overtime, he parked on the gravel road, walked to the back gate, and held the doll out when Chloe came running. She lit up, said those 4 words the neighbor's machine had caught, and walked out to his car on her own. He drove her to the cabin deep in the forest. That night, with the search already underway and fear of being caught setting in, he made the decision that ended her life and buried her beneath a pine tree behind the cabin, keeping her backpack, notebook, and doll as souvenirs. The next morning, he came back to Clarion and joined the search like any grieving family friend, even using his spare house key at some point during those chaotic first days to slice open the hidden birthday gift and plant the key and photograph inside, a private trophy hidden in plain sight. Then he drove the station wagon into locker 214, covered it, and paid to keep it sealed for 25 years. While Harlan gave his confession, search teams followed the coordinates from his journal into the Allegheny forest. As dusk fell, they found the old cabin, and beneath the roots of a pine tree behind it, Chloe's remains along with the matching wool headband from the branch found 25 years before. Miller and Vance drove to Birch Street to deliver the news. Maggie collapsed into her son's arms, weeping with a grief that had waited a quarter-century to fully break loose. Toby held her, crying too, absorbing the fact that the man who'd hugged his father at church, who'd searched for Chloe in the rain, had been the one who took her. The heartbreak was total, but underneath it, something else settled in too. The torment of not knowing was finally over. Harlan Reed was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice in early 2021. Facing overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life without parole. At sentencing, 71-year-old Harlan sat in a wheelchair, frail and silent, as Maggie stood at the podium and looked him in the eye. "You stole my daughter," she said, steady and clear. "You stole my husband's peace, and you made us live in darkness for 25 years. You thought you could keep your secret locked in a box forever, but the truth found its way out, and now my little girl can finally come home." Harlan died in prison 2 years later, alone, 3 weeks after the trial. On a bright May afternoon in 2021, the town gathered at the cemetery on the hill. Old neighbors, grown classmates, retired officers standing beneath a flowering cherry tree beside Arthur's grave, where Chloe would finally rest beside her father. Before the small casket was lowered, Maggie stepped forward with the unwrapped music box, wound the key 3 times and set it gently on top. For the first time in 25 years, the tiny wooden ballerina spun, and the soft lullaby carried out over the quiet crowd. Maggie leaned down, kissed the lid, and whispered, "Happy birthday, sweet Chloe. You're safe now." A few weeks later, Maggie and Toby finished the move to Pittsburgh. The house on Birch Street sold to a young family, bringing new laughter back to a place that had held quiet sorrow for 25 years. Maggie lived out her remaining years near Toby, in a sunlit apartment full of photographs. Chloe's laugh, her curls, her colorful drawings, all finally remembered without the shadow of not knowing. The story of Chloe Holloway became something the town of Clarion never forgot, proof of how deep a family's love can run, how patient justice can be, and how even after 25 years buried in silence, the truth still finds its way into the light.